The historical Bible presents Jesus of Nazareth as a Jew, born into the covenant people of Israel and positioned as their long-awaited Messiah. His earthly ministry, recorded in the Gospels as factual events in first-century Judea, focused exclusively on the lost sheep of the house of Israel. This was not incidental but a deliberate covenantal priority that excluded all Gentiles, including the ancestral lines that would later become white Europeans. White Americans of European descent who today identify as Christians therefore confront a profound irony. They worship and profess belief in a Jewish figure whose ministry, while alive, would have classified them as outsiders unworthy of direct participation in the kingdom message. The Bible, authored primarily by Jews and centered on the God of Israel, becomes the foundation for their faith despite this explicit exclusion. This irony deepens through the recognition that the Jewish God, the Jewish scriptures, and the Jewish Messiah form the entire theological framework. A white person living in America, thousands of miles and centuries removed from ancient Judea, devotes his life, identity, and hopes of salvation to a religion originating halfway across the world among a people who, according to the text, were chosen to the exclusion of his own racial and ethnic lineage. The sincere believer who considers himself a good person and deep thinker must grapple with the juxtaposition. He worships someone whose recorded words and actions reserved primary revelation and blessing for Jews alone. The Bible itself, written by Jews about the Jewish God and his dealings with the Jewish people, becomes the authoritative guide for non-Jews who were originally outside its covenantal scope. The divine irony lies in the fact that this faith system, which now shapes the spiritual and cultural identity of millions of white Europeans and their American descendants, began with a clear boundary that placed Gentiles secondarily at best. Jesus excluded non-Jews during his lifetime, yet white Christians today embrace the resulting religion as their own. This creates a layered tension between the historical record and contemporary belief, highlighting how a message originally directed inward to one ethnicity now commands universal allegiance from those once deliberately sidelined. The analysis that follows examines this irony through the scriptural text itself, revealing conflicts, shifts, and further ironies within the narrative. Jesus as the Jewish Messiah and his explicit exclusion of Gentiles. The Gospels portray Jesus as the Jewish Messiah whose mission was confined to the covenant people of Israel. He stated directly, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel," limiting his preaching, teaching, and miracles to Jewish villages and synagogues. This exclusion of Gentiles was not a minor detail but the structuring principle of his earthly ministry, recorded as historical fact rather than theological gloss. White Europeans, as descendants of Gentile nations, fell entirely outside this focus. The Bible offers no record of Jesus initiating outreach to European peoples or any non-Jewish groups during his lifetime. The Jewish Messiah thus operated within a racially and ethnically bounded framework that deferred or denied full participation to outsiders. Further instances underscore the deliberate nature of this exclusion. Jesus instructed the disciples to avoid Gentile territories and focus solely on the lost sheep of Israel, reinforcing that the kingdom message remained internal to the Jewish people until after the crucifixion. Encounters with Gentiles, such as the Canaanite woman or the Roman centurion, occurred only at the initiative of the outsiders and still highlighted their secondary status. The historical Bible presents these events as factual biography, showing Jesus participating in and enforcing a divine order that prioritized Jews. For white Americans of European descent, this means their ancestral lineage would have received no direct ministry or salvific emphasis while Jesus walked the earth. The irony intensifies when white Christians today profess belief in this same Jewish Messiah. They worship a figure whose recorded conduct explicitly placed their ethnic forebears outside the primary fold, yet they consider the Bible, written by Jews about the Jewish God and his Jewish Messiah, as the infallible guide for their lives. This creates a profound juxtaposition. A white person in America devotes himself to a religion whose founder, while alive, excluded Gentiles like him. The faith that now defines their spiritual identity originated in a context that treated their racial stock as secondary until a later expansion. The post-resurrection shift, vagueness of the Great Commission, and Paul's transformative role. After the resurrection, Jesus issued the Great Commission to make disciples of all nations, yet the exact instructions and timing remain vague in the historical record. The command appears in the closing chapters of the Gospels and Acts, but the text does not clarify how or when the shift from Jewish exclusivity to universal inclusion was to occur. This vagueness leaves room for interpretation, as the full universalization of the message did not materialize immediately through Jesus' direct followers. Instead, it emerged later through Paul, whose visionary encounter on the road to Damascus transformed the early movement and laid the foundations for Gentile Christianity. Paul's role introduces another layer of irony and potential conflict. While Jesus was alive, he warned against false prophets and those who would come in his name yet lead people astray. Paul, a Pharisee who never walked with Jesus during the earthly ministry, received his commission through a vision rather than direct association with the pre-crucifixion circle. This visionary authority became the basis for the universalism that allowed Gentiles, including white Europeans, to enter the faith without full conversion to Judaism. The historical Bible thus shows a transition from Jesus' explicit exclusion of Gentiles to a broader inclusion mediated by Paul, creating tension between the founders' recorded boundaries and the later expansion. For white Americans of European descent, this sequence heightens the irony. They believe in a Jewish Messiah who excluded them during his lifetime, yet their inclusion in the religion depends on a post-resurrection development that Jesus himself did not fully articulate while alive. The Bible, written largely by Jews and shaped by Jewish authors including Paul, becomes the scripture through which Gentiles claim belonging. This creates a divine irony. White Christians worship a figure whose earthly ministry sidelined their ancestors, with full access arriving only through a visionary prophet whose legitimacy rests on events after Jesus' ascension. The double irony of rejection. Jesus excluded Gentiles while his own people rejected him. The irony compounds when one considers that Jesus, while alive, was largely rejected by the Jews themselves. His message as the Jewish Messiah was widely dismissed by the religious leaders and much of the population, leading to his crucifixion. The historical Bible records that the very people for whom he came as Messiah ultimately excluded him, refusing to acknowledge him as the Son of God or the fulfillment of prophecy. Jesus therefore experienced exclusion from his own while simultaneously excluding Gentiles, creating an irony within an irony for modern believers. White Americans of European descent who embrace Christianity today believe in a message that originally excluded Gentiles like them, yet that same message was itself rejected and excluded by the Jewish people during Jesus' earthly ministry. The Jews, according to the text, did not accept him as their Messiah in large numbers, viewing his claims as incompatible with their expectations. This double exclusion, Jesus excluding Gentiles while being excluded by Jews, means that white Christians worship a figure whose core ministry was both inwardly focused and outwardly unsuccessful among its intended recipients. The Bible, written by Jews about these events, preserves the record of this rejection while becoming the foundation for Gentile faith centuries later. This juxtaposition stands as a profound conflict in the narrative. A white person in America today worships a Jewish Messiah from halfway across the world who was the Messiah specifically for the Jews, excluded non-Jews from his earthly teachings, and was ultimately rejected by most of those Jews. The religion that now shapes their identity originated in a context of mutual exclusion. Gentiles were sidelined by Jesus, and Jesus was sidelined by the Jewish people. Yet white Europeans and Americans fully embrace this faith, believing in the Jewish God, the Jewish Bible, and the Jewish Messiah as central to their own salvation. The divine irony lies in the complete reversal of original boundaries, where those once excluded now claim the religion as their own despite the historical record of deliberate separation. Conclusion. The historical shift from Jewish Messiah to universal Christianity. The divine irony confronting white Americans of European descent is inescapable when examined through the historical Bible. They worship a Jewish Messiah whose earthly ministry explicitly excluded Gentiles, including their own ancestral lineage. Jesus, as the Messiah for the Jews, directed his message solely to the lost sheep of Israel, withholding full participation from non-Jews until after the crucifixion. The Bible, authored by Jews and centered on the God of Israel, becomes the scripture through which these same Gentiles profess belief, creating a profound juxtaposition of distance, exclusion, and eventual embrace. Further ironies arise in the post-resurrection shift, where the Great Commission's vagueness gave way to universalism mediated primarily through Paul's visionary experience rather than direct instruction from the pre-ascension Jesus. This development, alongside Jesus' own rejection by most Jews during his lifetime, forms a double layer of exclusion within the narrative. White Christians today believe in a message that originally sidelined them, yet that message was itself dismissed by its intended recipients. The faith that now defines their spiritual identity originated halfway across the world among a people who, according to the text, both excluded outsiders and ultimately excluded the Messiah himself. This layered irony does not diminish the sincerity of belief but highlights the remarkable transformation of a Jewish-centered religion into one embraced by white Europeans and Americans. The good Christian who reflects deeply on the historical record confronts the reality that his worship centers on a figure and a book that began with deliberate boundaries now bridged through later developments. The divine irony thus serves as a point of intellectual honesty, inviting contemplation of how a faith rooted in Jewish particularism and mutual exclusion became the foundation for Gentile devotion across continents and centuries. In this light, the belief of white Americans in Jesus Christ stands as a testament to the faith's expansive power despite its origins in exclusion.